This is Dennis Mundy. I'm here with my co-host, Phil Goldberg. Our podcast and also YouTube channel, Spirit Matters, found at spiritmatterstalk.com. I want to thank those who have been contributing to keep us on the air and making our archives free and available to everyone. And if you want to continue doing that, go to our website, spiritmatterstalk.com, and it will tell you to do. We are thrilled today, honored to have as our guest, Tenzin Priyadarshi. He is president and CEO of the Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Values at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He was born a Hindu. He entered a Buddhist monastery of his own volition at the age of 10, and is on numerous boards and having a tremendous influence. He was the first Buddhist chaplain at MIT. And we're, as I said, thrilled and excited to have you on today. Thank you so very much for taking the time.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Tenzin, you have one of the more interesting biographies. We always like our listeners to get a sense of the spiritual journey of our guests. Maybe you can briefly tell us how you were, from what I read, raised in Bihar in the east part of India, and ended up a Tibetan Buddhist monk. Tell us how that came about.
I think mostly serendipitously and in a very non-rational manner. I was living with my parents near Calcutta. And around the age of 6, I started having some recurring dreams. And by the time I was 10, it intensified to the point that I ran away from my boarding school. And I ended up taking a 2-day train journey and arrived in Rajgir in Bihar, and at the base of Vulture Peak, and recognized that that was one of the visions that I was having. And from then on, things just simply unfolded in an interesting manner.
I have a question in regard to that. And I think most people in the West would not understand this. And that is to go from being a Hindu to being a Buddhist. Is that a major transition? Is that something that sometimes his families would take concern over? Or is it an easy transition? And I know in Hinduism, there's tremendous flexibility in terms of how one worships and could still be a Hindu, but going from Hindu to Buddhist, was that difficult?
I mean, it really depends on, what kind of family you are part of. And my family was somewhat of a liberal Hindu. The issue or the challenge wasn't as much as that I had disposition towards Buddhism. I think the more the challenge was about taking up a monastic life, which went against not only some of their own sort of religious belief system, but also went against the social systems that they were part of, and they had hoped that I would remain part of.
Yes, and I've written about a lot of the Indian gurus who've come here, and many of them talk about their families resisting the monastic urge that they had. They all want their grandchildren, and
yeah, especially if you're the only son in the family, that raises the stakes. Yeah.
Yes, and in Yogananda's case, I wrote a biography of him. He was the second oldest son, but then his older brother died, which made it that much more difficult for his father to acquiesce to the monastic life.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of married life and the obligations thereof in terms of having kids and so on, actually takes up an entire religious framework in India. Mm-hmm. And so it was more about, questions that were primarily posed was, whether I was evading my responsibilities as the only son, escaping, parental obligations and things of that nature. And that was the journey that, lasted for 18 years and still continues to this day.
But now you ended up studying at Harvard and have, looks like, multiple advanced degrees. And you did that as a Buddhist monk. Is that correct? That's the order of things. What drew you to the secular education of Ivy League?
Well, even in India, I was having a sort of, somewhat of an eclectic upbringing because, in the Buddhist tradition, you cannot take full ordination vows unless your parents, if they're alive, have agreed to it.
Mhm.
And this was something that Buddha, the historical Buddha himself, had instituted in his lifetime. And so it didn't have to do with whether I was 10 years old. I couldn't make a decision. I legally wasn't able to. And so the happy medium that my parents and I sort of agreed upon was that I'll continue to have secular studies while training as a monk and receiving monastic education. Because as far as my parents were concerned, I was 10 years old and it was kind of an early teenage phase, and that it might last for 6 months or 2 years or 3 years, but then it'll be over. And so they emphasized this whole idea of secular education. And it was only after, several years of juggling two curriculums that I realized that, that there was some value in it. There was some value in the discipline of secular education. There was some value in the explorations that there were. And of course, there were moments in my life when I was disillusioned by one form of education or the other form of education. But I think what principally sort of this coming to the US allowed me was to really do a deep dive in disciplines and knowledge disciplines that perhaps otherwise wouldn't have been possible, to sort of study philosophy and physics together at a university level. Those things were not sort of encouraged. It wasn't feasible because of the bureaucracy of education systems there. And I do believe that I really valued from that.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, you have one of the more remarkable backgrounds of any one of the few thousand people I've interviewed. And one of the things I found fascinating was that you wound up in a Jesuit college, Lemoyne College, near Syracuse. And the Jesuits are very scholarly in terms of Catholicism. They're more open to new things, new traditions, new spiritualities than probably other areas of Catholicism. And I'm wondering how that went for you. What brought you to that college? Were you seeking out the Jesuits? And if so, how did they receive you as a Buddhist?
Oh, it was one of the more remarkable experiences. I mean, I was familiar with the Catholic tradition quite a bit because my schooling in India was through the Irish Christian Brothers and the Catholic schools and so on. The Jesuits were wonderful. It allowed me to sort of maintain, how should I put it? I could tolerate the culture shock. You see, coming from sort of a monastic life into an undergraduate institution, but to be able to maintain this interest in spiritual life and spiritual explorations, that allowed me to sort of, sort of continue with the interest and the disposition, the spiritual disposition that I had. And I sort of was grateful for that experience. I met some tremendous individuals in the Jesuit order, including Daniel Berrigan, who was sort of this remarkable poet, but one of the pillars of the peace movement in the 60s in the US.
And there was no pressure to convert you to Catholicism.
Oh, no. I mean, I've gone through that phase from very early on where, representatives of different religious tradition have often thought it would have been a good idea for me to join them, from the Hindus to the Hare Krishna to Ramakrishna Mission to Irish Christian Brothers to Jesuits. And I think one of the beauty of being a monk in the Tibetan tradition allowed me to do was that I could explore all of them fully while being grounded in the openness of the Buddhist tradition.
Tell us about the Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Values. Why is it at MIT? How did it come about? You're the founder of it, and it's now, what, 11, 12 years old, and many of us are hearing about it for the first time. Tell us about the origins and the purpose.
Certainly. So I joined MIT back in 2002, full time, while I was still sort of a graduate student. And initially I joined as the Buddhist Chaplain to the Institute. Then I sort of became a visiting scholar. And I had thought again that my stay there would be probably for a year or two. But my interest grew in the kinds of work that I was doing there. And by 2006, 2007, I had been touring around North America at various institutes of higher education. And one of the things that sort of hit me pretty hard was that there was no systematic exploration of education around ethics. That most universities, sort of had ethics as a philosophy 101 kind of thing. But nobody was sort of thinking deeply about, how humans learn certain kinds of behavioral traits and so on. And by the time 2008, 2009 came around, I was already having these kinds of discussions with colleagues at MIT. And then the financial meltdown happened, and it sort of raised this issue around, what are we actually doing in education systems to foster a kind of critical thinking around ethical decision making and so on. And that sort of prompted the founding of the Center for Ethics and Transformative Values at MIT. And I asked the 6 Nobel Peace Laureates with whom I had some interactions, and others that I was quite close to. And then came the interesting question, which is that should I just leave it as Center for Ethics at MIT, or should we give it a name? And as you know, generally in American institutions, oftentimes, if somebody writes you a big check, then you put their name on it. And I was sort of reluctant with that idea that what if the donor is him or herself not very ethical, to have their name on a Center for Ethics. So I sort of, went back and forth with the founding members. And in 2008, one of the French surveys did a public survey and polling of the global influential leaders, and the Dalai Lama topped the chart. And so Archbishop Tutu said, "That's your answer." And so the center is not sort of Buddhist in its leaning. The entire enterprise is somewhat secular, and it has grown tremendously. The hub is at MIT, but we operate programs in 10 countries, from business schools to judicial systems to middle and high schools and so on. And we focus a lot on just doing programs. I was wary of just, sort of just doing PR or having a flashy appearance of the center. The whole idea was that let's do the work. And as the work becomes more familiar and known, people will then know what the center is about.
At the center at MIT, do you teach practice? Do students do practically come and you teach them meditation?
No.
So it's not that.
No, it's, the role of teaching meditation or Buddhist philosophy and things of that nature is something I do through a different platform, through a different outfit. The Center for Ethics, the programs may be informed by contemplative traditions, Christianity, Buddhism, and so on. But in its entirety, the program is meant to be designed in a way that anybody can do it, anybody can take it, and it doesn't have any, religious orientation.
But and what exactly do the people who take the program, what do they get out of it? What is the intention? And is there are there ethical principles that you convey, or is it a way of coming to training people to come to their own kind of ethical standard?
That's a great question. What we like to convey is a set of tools around critical thinking, set of tools that makes individuals aware of their own biases and how they perceive things, how they make choices, how they make decisions. The center is not a prescriptive enterprise. And that was one of the things that I was very cautious of, being cognizant of my own education in the past. And I recognize that prescriptive methods around ethics has not served us well. It either makes us very self-righteous or it makes us fanatic about certain kinds of things. So what we really wanted to sort of suggest through this center is that ethical learning is an important part of any kind of learning. But what it really ought to give you is a set of tools that really fosters a kind of critical thinking, perspective taking, and so on. And so we have programs for all kinds of demographics, from business leaders to government leaders. In Colombia, we have done program for Supreme Court judges. We do program for high school teachers and so on. And oftentimes, the key thing is for it not to become a prescriptive thing. I say it sort of sometimes lightly, but it's a bigger issue that it's easier to become self-righteous. It's much more difficult to be ethical.
Right. I'm
Can
curious.
I follow up, Dennis?
Go ahead.
You mentioned tools. I'm just curious what kind of tools they are, or maybe an example.
So, I mean, certain tools are sort of built into the processes with which we design the interactive sessions and workshops around didactic thinking, Socratic methods, looking at sort of, how individuals get to values. For example, how do they instill certain kinds of values? Have they thought about it? Are they values of the family, the nation, the tribe, the religion? Why do they adhere to it? What are the values that prime them subconsciously in how they see the society? One of the major issues that we are dealing with today is implicit bias. It's pervasive. How do we tactfully observe our implicit bias and try to sort of regulate it or minimize it? There are other aspects to it around, what is popularly in the framework of social emotional learning. Understanding how emotions inform, again, our perceptions, choices, and decision making, and so on. So some of these things are processes. The others are also designing innovative tools like apps and games. So recognizing that, one of the worst things I find is lecturing on ethics to an 11-year-old kid. But if we design games by which kids are playing with each other and recognizing what kind of values goes into certain kind of decision making, does it build trust? Does it build cooperation, or it builds competition? So those are the kinds of tools also that we are interested in designing, and we have designed a few of them over the years.
I'm curious, again, reflecting on your time at MIT, do you get a more interest from people? I'm curious in physical science, say physicists as opposed to life science people, in terms of neurobiologists. Do you notice differences based upon what areas people are focusing on? And at a place like MIT, anyone there is going to be deeply focused and immersed, I would think, in their academic discipline, and that if that affects their approach and their response to ethics.
Certainly, I think the disciplines that individuals are steeped in is a primary driver sometimes in how they approach the subject of ethics. I think at MIT, the wonderful thing is that it's a very vibrant community, and a lot of people are questioning, how their discipline serves sort of the broader knowledge field, and more importantly, how do they come together to make the world a better place? Constantly dealing with problems that are relevant, either at micro or macro scale, and so on. And so it's really a delight to work with, an interdisciplinary group of individuals from neuroscience, from robotics, from business school, from oceans engineering. And it all sort of gives a wonderful set of new tools and perspectives in how we are approaching this world.
Right. If I could follow up, Phil, I'm real curious at artificial intelligence. The ethics of that is being discussed quite a bit, and I'm wondering if that's something that your institute has been dealing with, especially at MIT, where a lot of AI work is being done.
Yes, yes, I'm actually quite steeped in fact, earlier when we were having the schedule mishap, I was actually talking to colleagues at IBM on this thing. So I run something called Ethics and Governance of Artificial Intelligence that started as a collaborative. It's an area that's emerging very quickly. It's going to have tremendous impact, not only on industries, but also on education, on healthcare, but more importantly, it would shape what it means to be human
Right.
in 5 to 10 years from now. And so it begs, very urgently, sort of the questions around, ethics and design process, ethics and implementation, what the governance regulations or mechanisms will be around it. And that's a conversation I'm sort of actively having, pretty much several conversations a day.
I'm going to bring up a delicate subject, but you're heavily involved in promoting ethics and studying it. You're also in a monastic lineage. In the research I've had to do for my books and stuff, I have become very conscious of ethical problems that have arisen in spiritual and religious circles. And you're in Boston, where, of course, the church's struggles with that have been so prominent. All the various gurus who came here from India, many of them ran into ethical problems, usually around sex. It happened in the Tibetan Buddhist context, as you know, and other Buddhist contexts in America, in the yoga world, and various things. Have you given much thought to that? Do you have outreach to spiritual communities?
I think it's a question of, is whether a spiritual community is looking for those kinds of feedback or not. Much of my work has been mostly just around education and technology and so on. But, I do run a spiritual community as well, and act as a spiritual counselor and advisor in my capacity as a Buddhist monk. And it is something that is ongoing, in the sense that, the 60s and 70s, were an interesting time period where there was a lot of mishmash in terms of what defined an ethical code of conduct. Oftentimes, there wasn't a given set of clarity. And even today, when you ask individuals who are part of those groups or part of those memberships, there are some who are very critical of it, and there are others who are very grateful for it. Meaning that, again, there's no sort of clear boundaries. Those are the things that we are beginning to witness more so in the last 5 years or so, because a lot of drama has happened under the name of crazy wisdom, in the name of teacher-student relationship and things of that nature. I think it is as highlighted traditionally in Buddhism, that it is both the responsibility of the teacher and the congregation or the community that the teacher is part of to mutually reflect and examine. One of the things that we don't often recognize is that in traditional Buddhism, they used to say that, even if it takes you 12 years to find a teacher, take that time, because it's a very important relationship. But today, people are impatient. We either find a teacher because of their charisma, we find a teacher because we find their appearances attractive, we find a teacher simply because the teacher speaks English, as opposed to some of the other languages, meaning that the shortcuts that we are taking in terms of relating to a spiritual teacher can cause quite a bit of damage and breaches. And so, my sort of two cents always is that there ought to be mutual examination. And the teacher and student relationship is one of the most profound relationships known to humankind. We must sort of reflect deeply on it.
May I interject? I just looked this up because what you said reminded me of something I have quoted the Dalai Lama as saying on occasion. And I hope this is accurate. I just looked it up quickly. Before taking someone as a teacher, be careful. Use your critical faculty and subject that teacher to scrutiny.
Yes, that is quite correct. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said that many a times in many a public gatherings. But you have to also be cognizant of the fact that not every Buddhist teacher believes that. Not every Buddhist teacher agrees with it. And we often run into these kinds of conflicting patterns where, the teacher calls for faith without examination. And those are the challenges that will continue to grow, with the amount of confusion there is. Meaning that, we don't actually have very good templates for how to go about this kind of mutual examination, again, because we don't take the time to do so.
One final question from me, and that is, how are we for time, Phil?
We have a good 5 or 6.
Okay, and that is in your role as a chaplain at MIT for the students. I believe you were the first Buddhist chaplain there. How was that? Was it a one-on-one counseling with students? Did you ever perform any rituals? What was your role?
No, it's a collection of roles, because chaplaincy is very much like ministerial sort of reaching out to the campus, and it's not just for students, but it is also for larger MIT community, so teachers, staff, and so on. And as part of that role, we have regular meditation sessions, we have retreats, we have speaker series. There's a lot of counseling that happens. There's a lot of counseling that happens in times such as these, when the pandemic has challenged a lot of certainty around student life and how they approach subjects, relationships, things of that nature. So it sort of encompasses all of those things.
Were you getting a lot of non-Buddhist students coming to you?
Of course. It's one of those places, universities are places where students are also exploring their spirituality and their religious dispositions. And so we do get a lot of individuals who are not, traditionally Buddhists.
And do you do a lot of joint projects on campus with the other chaplains from other traditions?
Yeah, I think one of the joys of being in a campus like MIT is that you're working in a multi-religious setting and environment, so it allows for promoting certain kinds of conversations and so on. And then given my own sort of proclivities towards other religious traditions, I've had wonderful opportunity of hosting many of them. I had Father Thomas Keating on MIT's campus a number of times for public conversations, Brother David Steindl-Rost, and even people who are not belonging to any of the religious traditions per se, because I think that's one of the obligations as well, is to expose students to such conversations and such dialogues.
And
I one last question for me, and that is, I have a tremendous interest in the ethic associated with artificial intelligence. I think this is, as you mentioned, huge. Where can one go to get more information about that? Does your institute, is there materials either available online or otherwise where one could keep up to date with what's going on and what's being written and said in that area?
Well, we don't, we mostly design programs for study purposes for participants who are participating in the program. Much of the work that I do that is sort of in the public domain generally comes in forms of public conversations. or it'll come in forms of papers that I might do in collaboration with somebody like IEEE, the eminent engineering association that publishes white papers and things of that nature.
Tenzin, in your biography that online, it says that you were involved with some conflict resolution activities in both India and Sri Lanka. I'm curious about them. I spent a lot of time in India, and I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about those.
I think it was, it was sort of something that was driven by need or necessity, so to speak. One that, you're in a position as a religious leader or religious individual. And, we do tend to identify quite a few conflicts, even if they're ethnic or economical conflicts. We tend to categorize them as religious. And so it becomes important for religious leaders to then start playing a role in that. And whether these are conflicts that happen, between, say, Hindu, Muslim, Christian communities, or Buddhist and Hindu communities in Sri Lanka, or conflict right now. I'm involved in some capacity in Colombia, in the peace making processes. I think it's just a matter of sort of what kind of tools one can bring in, and recognizing that while religion is perceived as a divisive force, and it has unfortunately historically acted as such, but there are certain tools that are present in religious traditions that can help us sort of truly bring us together.
What are the students in this difficult year that we've all just been through? How do students reach out to you remotely? What is their biggest challenge? One of our previous guests is a friend of mine who you probably know, Varun Soni, who's at USC, and
Yes.
he was telling me there's a lot of depression, anxiety, suicidal tendencies have been elevated. Is that the case?
I think that is the case in all American institutions of higher education, and I think it has just sort of become exasperated because of the constraints posed by pandemic. And that's part of the thing that you only imagine what people did 100 years ago when there was no Zoom and there was no internet to keep sanity while maintaining this level of isolation. And so those are the things that we'll sort of continue to see and continue to deal with even in months and years to come. Depression is not going anywhere unless we begin to sort of tactfully design some good responses for it.
I would think living in a monastery, trained as a monk, the pandemic would be easier to handle than it would be for somebody that was very active with people in the world.
Yeah, I think, it depends on personality types. Like, introverts handle the situation much better than extroverts. Being in a monastery, what people often forget is that you're all often in communities, right? And sometimes mid-sized to large communities. So you are interacting with people. But nonetheless, I am thankful to my earlier training, that allows me to embrace solitude at a wonderful in wonderful ways. I think, but it wasn't a traditional solitude. It wasn't a traditional retreat, because you're constantly making yourself available over phone calls or Zoom calls for, any number of needs that people are proposing.
We have about 1 minute, and I have a very important question. I ask this of everybody I meet who came to America from India. What was your first winter in the Northeast like?
I think the charm lasted for 2 days.
That long, huh?
And then I was over it. But my friends used to joke because most of my friends who were monks, when they came to the US, they would choose to stay in the West Coast, or they would go to southern part of the US. I, on the other hand, have maintained physical presence in the East Coast, and so it's an interesting training.
I'll bet. I know, I've heard some great stories. Thank you so much for being with us. It's been a joy, and wish we had more time. Perhaps you'll come back another time and we'll explore some things more deeply.
Thank you. It was delightful. Have a lovely day.
And keep up the good work. We'll look forward to hearing more about your work at MIT.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Phil, that was Tenzin Priyadarshi. Incredible background. Going into a monastery by choice at the age of 10, having to talk your parents into it. I believe he was in a Catholic Christian Brothers boarding school at the time. Then he, has all kinds of academic credentials in the United States, from Harvard, he went to a Jesuit college. Kind of an amazing background. It was hard to believe. Yeah,
I know. And in India, usually if somebody feels a calling to the monastic life, it's to join an ashram, or depending on whether it could be a bhakti group, it could be a Advaita Vedanta group. It's rare that somebody would find his way to Buddhism. He was in the part of India not far from where the historic Buddha would have been, I think.
right.
But nevertheless, I don't think that matters that much.
But I have a question, Phil. You've spent a lot more time in India than I have, and you've been all over India. What is the relationship between Buddhists and Hindus? Certain religions in the world don't mesh well, but I've never heard of conflicts between Buddhists and Hindus.
In Sri Lanka,
there is.
Yeah, it's a
So
very
is it
sad
more from the
story.
Hindu side, or is it more from
I
the
don't.
Hindu side?
I'm not going to.
You don't know how it. You don't want to be a referee.
I don't know enough, but
I'm just curious how his parents reacted when he decided.
Well, he
to become
said
a Buddhist.
they were very liberal, and
Right.
my guess is they cared less that it was a Buddhist monastic life.
Then he didn't get married.
Just a monastic life,
Right.
parents-
Only son.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, as I mentioned in the interview, it was a very big deal in Yogananda's life. His father fought it tooth and nail. They set up marriages for him on 3 different occasions. And he got him a job, his choice job, when he finished college. He said, no, it's not who I am, And but the father came around and was very proud and all that. But that's it. You grew up in a Catholic family. There's probably when we were kids, many Catholic families looked forward to a son being a priest.
No, I think my father was afraid when I was young that I wanted to be a priest, and he thought if they get their hands on you at an early age, they're going to talk you into it. You can make that decision later on.
But what I hear is it's often it becomes okay if the older sons get married and have children.
Right.
Then the last
family that has 10 kids, once you become a priest, once you become a nun, they have a lot to share. They can spread it around.
To go back to your question, there's not that many Buddhists in India, actually. Buddhism started in India.
Right.
Buddha was Indian, and but the Buddhist diaspora took it all over Asia, and there's much less of it in India. There's more of it now because the Dalai Lama settled in India. In fact, my next tour and next year, if things work out, we're going to go to Dharamsala.
What was there resistance in India to the Dalai Lama and his group?
I don't think so. No,
they were very open to it.
Well, certainly the government and the officials welcomed it. They gave him the properties and all that. Whether there were anybody, people in India who objected, I have no idea. But
Right.
they would have been a minority. Buddha is held by many Indians as an incarnation, as an avatar, like Krishna, and so he's revered. And outside of Varanasi, there's Buddhist monasteries. It's in Sarnath. It is said that Buddha, the historic Buddha, gave his first public talk, his first sermon. It's not far from Varanasi, and it's a holy place. There was the site.
Yeah, I wanted to I brought it up toward the end a second time with Tenzin, this idea of ethics in science and artificial intelligence. Because we're within a few decades, maybe not in our lifetime, but certainly in the next 50, if things continue to progress, artificial intelligence, when, as I understand, the computers become self-programming and all, and between that and robotics, we may reach a point where it will be very difficult to distinguish a human being as we know a human being and something created by human beings, a robot with artificial intelligence, that level of intelligence, and all kinds of ethical issues are going to be coming up, just like they have with cloning and other areas like that.
Probably already.
And I'm wondering if religions that are more introspective, I would think, like Hinduism and Buddhism, if they'll be able to more comfortably deal with it than Christianity, Judaism, other religions.
You'll have to write a Twilight Zone episode.
Twilight Zone episode, exactly.
One thing I meant to bring up in the context of ethics in the modern world is climate change.
Right.
And I wish I'd thought of asking him about that, because MIT they're probably doing a whole lot of research around climate change and how to mitigate it and everything. And it's as much an ethical issue as it is a political and technological issue.
Right. Yeah, I know. I mean, religions during the civil rights period struggled. Is segregation, is it a sin? Catholics struggled with that. Is purposely doing damage to the environment sinful and categorized in that way? And these are the kinds of things that these folks deal with. And it sounds like he at MIT. If you've ever spent time at MIT, and I used to give some TM lectures there, the people are extremely bright, and quantitatively it's amazing, and I guess the same ethical issues come up that would come up at any place, but I would think it would be a very interesting group to work with, and now, like you said, with climate change or with artificial intelligence, these are the people that are in the forefront of these developments. And I wonder if ethics comes into it when there are considerations. Should we do this research? What will it lead to? Is it good? Is it bad?
I think it's extremely important. We know how important that is in medicine. There's medical ethicists, people, that's their specialty, that's their training. I would guess in science, what you decide to study, what you do with the results, with your data, all that there's probably ethical considerations, and and climate change obviously brings up a lot of it. You need to get an electric car, Dennis, or you're going to go to hell.
Well, that is definitely.
I have one now.
Both. Do you really?
Yeah.
I'm on my way. I'm in Iowa. There's very few places to plug it. And if I want to, and the extension cords aren't as long here as they are in California. Yeah, but look, all for it. Another fabulous guest. Again, I want to thank the people out there that have contributed to keep us on the air. We are not a nonprofit. It's a contribution, not a donation. And we have, for the last 5 years, been free and open to everyone, and our archives are free and open to everyone. And we want to keep it that way now and for always. And any support to keep us on the air would be fantastic.
It's the ethical thing to do.
It's the ethical thing to do. We can feel good about it. And We are spread, and you know, we get you know, people listening in from all over, and now we are a YouTube channel, so you get to see Phil and I. Some of you might go back to the podcast, you'd rather not see us, but that's okay too. Same
Yeah,
information.
freedom of choice.
Yeah.
All right, Dennis, next
Till
time.
next time. Thank you.
Yeah.